The Artemis 1 mission was a test, launching the Orion capsule around the moon.
I'm calling it Orion and the 10 dwarfs because it has the main mission, which is Orion, the capsule, and a whole bunch of small secondary payloads. Artemis 1, it succeeded in the main mission in particular. So yeah. Finally, after a lot of money and a lot of time, they finally did. I think that's really a great thing. The capsule splashed down on December 11th. What happened to it after that? Well, they picked it up at the ship and they brought it back. It's now back at Kennedy Space Center, where they're now going in and basically disassembling it. They want to look at every single part because some of this stuff you want to see what kind of damage there was for the heat shields and all that kind of thing. The test dummies, see how they did. They had at least one test dummy involved in that. And then actually, it's like a bunch of vultures. They're going to scavenge the thing. They're going to pull out the avionics, the electronics, the antennas, and various other parts. Those are actually probably, surprisingly, on the critical path for the next launch. It's kind of funny. Instead of buying a lot of them once, they're actually reusing them, which is kind of a good thing. Part of the problem it takes so long is I think they have to actually cut through some welds to get at some of this equipment, the way it's built. A crew seat, there's a crew seat that's being recycled. They're using that. Their plan in general is to use more in the Orion missions, and they're not there yet, so they're doing it kind of piece by piece. Now, the secondary CubeSat payloads, CubeSat, remember, a 4x4x4 cube as a size unit. Most of these payloads were about 6 of those units, so kind of a briefcase kind of a size, maybe 20 to 30 pound kind of range typically. There were 10 of those that went up with it, and they were just basically up there in the fairing just below the Orion capsule. There was a lot of concern because of delays in Artemis 1. All these things were sitting in there for a couple of years. They were charged up. They all had rechargeable batteries to be recharged by solar cells once they're in operation. And they couldn't get at all of them, even to keep them recharged. I guess nobody ever thought it would take that long. They just didn't design for that. And maybe there's a lesson here that they probably should. Some of those rideshares have failed, and maybe that's part of the reason. There were 3 that just never even established contact. So they were just dead from the beginning. We'll never know why they died, but maybe the battery was part of the problem. The ones that died, it's too bad. There are a couple of really interesting ones. The Near-Earth Asteroid Scout. This was the one that had a solar sail. They were going to sail to an asteroid, a small asteroid. We did cover that in one of the earlier news sessions. It was a really pretty innovative kind of a thing. The second one was an actual lunar lander. The thing weighs about 31 pounds. This is from the Japanese government, the Jackson Space Agency. Omotenashi. It again completely failed. They just never made contact, so they don't know what happened. Too bad. It would have eventually dropped down. It had an airbag. Japanese make airbags. They had some problems with airbags actually, but that was actually their final landing strategy, was to have a big airbag, and they used it. That was part of that 31 pounds. There was a kind of an amateur one called the Miles Space Team, testing some kind of plasma thruster. Again, no contact on that. There's a Lockheed project called Lunar, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. It's doing some tests with spectroscopy, basically taking measurements around either the moon or the Earth. They got a weak signal back, so it's not quite clear what's going on with that, but I think it's sort of in the failure category, maybe not. Now, there's one called CUSP, which is tracking space weather, meaning solar particles, magnetic fields, effects of the sun, pretty much, and what damage it might do to the spacecraft. That was actually okay at first. But then they started having battery problems. They got spikes in temperatures and that kind of thing. They started getting a lot of reboots. They lost contact a couple of times, and finally, it just died. Now, they're still hoping, it may come back. They think in a couple of months it's going to be in a place where if they manage to deploy some of their solar cells, maybe it'll recontact. So there's still some hope for this one. But this one, it may have been because of the battery being so heavily discharged that maybe it got damaged or something. There's another one called the Luna H map. This is a hydrogen map. Basically looking for water. They're looking for ice on, but they're doing it specifically by looking for the hydrogen atoms that they're part of the water molecules. That one was okay. It started off, they still had 70% of their battery power. No problem with that one. Their problem is the propulsion system. All these things typically have their own propulsion. They go up, they're put in place by a giant rocket, but the exact orbits they go into, they do that under their own propulsion. They had trouble with that. It's not working. It's just flat out not working. So there's a valve stuck. What it is it's some kind of ion engine, and there's some valve that involves flow of ions, and it's stuck. They think they can heat it up and maybe get it going again. They've already missed their window to get into where they're supposed to be, which is a polar orbit around the moon. They missed that, but they're still in the general area. They figure if they can get it working, they could actually finally end up in 2024 where they want it to be. So it'll take some time. But it has to be done in the next month or so. So the jury is still out on this one. And some people have suggested maybe that was due to the long delays also, just the metal sitting on metal, not moving for a long period of time. Those atoms start sticking together. So that could have been the problem, but of course, nobody really knows. There are operational payloads. So there are at least 4 that are operating as planned. There's one that was another Japanese space agency probe called the Equalus, scanning for radiation and plasma in the general area of both Earth and the Moon. There's a project called BioSentinel, and this one was actually heading off into deep space for a solar orbit. And they're taking with them some yeast, but they were going to study the effects of radiation in deep space on life, yeast in this case, representing us. There's another one which is also prospecting for water ice called the Lunar Ice Cube. And I don't know much about the technology of it, but it apparently is working fine. Now, all these things, it'll take a while to get results from, but there's at least 4 total successes going so far. And a couple that are questionable, and then the rest of them are dead.